free agency frenzy.
Looking for a big-time target.
It all starts right now.
Who goes where?
Big play, Trey. Shaheed to the end zone.
Then I make it reappear like a magic trick.
More Murray magic.
Big time play by Zero.
Get to the money mentality.
Let us not forget Ken Walker III.
Wow, Marshawn Lattimore, absolutely textbook.
Malik Willis doing it all.
Get money.
Big catch by Big Mike.
Get to the money. Living good, living loud, living fabulous.
Cousins dropped it in a bucket. An explosive run from Travis Etienne. It's a sack for Devin Bush. He's having a day.
Money players, money time.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Insiders here on NFL Network. Patrick Claybon in the NFL LA newsroom, joined by our NFL Network insiders, Tom Pelissero, Judy Batista, Ian Rappaport, and Mike Garafolo. If you exclusively get your free agency news from this program and you last left us at 7:58 Eastern yesterday, some things have happened. We're going to talk about those things. I'm going to explain them and contextualize this for you because that's...
Didn't even get to stand up. We were right back into it.
Well, some of us stood up, ran away, walked to cars perhaps, and came all the way back. We're back here, Ian. We're doing it all. Let's get to what's new today. Yes, coming into the newsroom, the Colts finalizing a deal with Daniel Jones. Of course, the new league year started today, so everything became official, and all concerns could go away. A 2-year deal that could be worth up to $100 million if the incentives go and everything works out. So Daniel Jones will remain in Indianapolis. Finally, also official, Kyler Murray no longer an Arizona Cardinals football player after 7 seasons, released and announced seconds after the new league year actually began, as a lot of folks, including perhaps Kyler himself, was waiting for this particular statement that did come from the Cardinals today, saying with today's start of the new league year, and Jackson's now official. We want to thank Kyler for everything he's done for the organization over the last 7 seasons. That comes courtesy of Monty Ossenfort. So now Kyler can have some conversations with other folks. Also released at the quarterback position, Kirk Cousins gets a post-June 1 designation as the Atlanta Falcons were able to sign Tua Tagovailoa. They also have got Michael Penix Jr. coming back from his ACL reconstruction. So Kirk Cousins free to have those discussions as well. And one part of the news of yesterday involving Trey Hendrickson getting a 4-year deal could be worth up to $60 million guaranteed after the Crosby trade falls through. People speculated. We got some context and some explanation from Ravens general manager Eric DeCosta a couple hours ago.
I think our relationship with agents and with other teams is really, really good. I understand the question. I think that GMs understand the importance of getting as much information as possible before making decisions. And I would say that most agents would say that myself, George, Nick, Mark Acevedo, Ozzie, Sashi, everybody that works with agents would say that we're a class organization that does business the right way, respectful, and willing to get deals done.
Derek, I know you've had to make some tough conversations with players over the years. What was it like with Max when you had to inform him that you guys were going to have to move on?
Yeah, you know, like you said, in this business you have a lot of tough conversations, right? It was tough. It's a guy that I really admire as a player. I mean, you've all watched him play, so you all know what he's like as a player, right? This is a guy that plays like a Raven, you know? So, yeah, it's challenging. You get emotionally attached. That's what I would say.
Eric, you said you were gutted by this. Is there anything you regret that you did or did not do as part of this process that could have changed the results, the end results here?
You know, I think I'm hard on myself, and you question everything you do, in this business. You're never perfect, right, with the draft and with free agency. I think in this particular instance, I'm really proud of the team and the doctors and, the guys that work with me. And this is a tough thing that we have to deal with in this business. I don't really know what we could do differently than what we did. So, again, it's a really, really, really tough call. There were moments yesterday when, honestly, I was probably speechless. Just sitting in my chair in my office and just thinking about what the next step would be and trying to get as much information as possible. And it wasn't, I should say, it wasn't just, in a situation like this, you try to get as much information as you can from as many different sources as you can. And it just didn't work out. So, tough, very, very challenging. We've dealt with these kinds of things in the past, but probably never at such a large figure. So, challenging.
Did you try to renegotiate at all the terms of it?
I think at some point you get to the point where, when you look at the situation, you have to make the right decision. It's not always about, the value. It's just what is the right decision for the club at the time. And that's a hard thing to do. But as I said, when you're a steward of the organization and you're put in that position, you've got to make the tough call.
All right, welcome inside with the insiders, Tom, Ian, Judy, and Mike. A lot to unpack right there from Eric DeCosta speaking to reporters about an hour ago. But Ian, as Patrick mentioned off the top, this has been a wild 24 hours. Catch us up to speed on exactly how we got here.
We finished the show last night at 8 p.m. Eastern. 8:02, the message came in from the Raiders saying that the Ravens have nullified the trade for Maxx Crosby, and then everything went absolutely crazy. Talk about frenzy. That right there was a frenzy. Here's what we know. Maxx Crosby was in Baltimore having his physical, remember, 2 months out from having surgery to repair his torn meniscus. The Ravens knew that he was not going to be 100%. They, and the Cowboys, by the way, as well, pursued a trade for Maxx Crosby, believing that he was progressing enough and that his knee was going to be good enough that they would feel confident that the trade was going to work. They did the trade. It was 2 first-rounders for Crosby. During the course of the physical, the Baltimore Ravens, their doctors, and other doctors that they consulted with, including Dr. Dan Cooper from the Dallas Cowboys, one of the nation's expert in this, they decided that there was risk. Now, how much risk is really for anyone to judge, but the Ravens did not feel like the risk was enough to warrant 2 first-round picks going to the Las Vegas Raiders. They talked to him about potentially, as Jane and Mike reported, about potentially redoing the trade. It did not happen. The trade was off. Crosby headed back to Las Vegas to continue his career with the Raiders. And then this morning, Tom, when you and I were on Good Morning Football, the Ravens dove in head first in the edge market and signed Trey Hendrickson, the top edge available, to a 4-year, $112 million deal, $60 million guaranteed. And there was the Ravens' big-ticket edge. They actually discussed signing both of these guys, trading for Crosby and signing Hendrickson. They end up only with Trey Hendrickson, which is a huge addition, but half of what they thought it would be.
Well, that is one of the things we learned from Eric DeCosta in his meeting with reporters, is that the plan actually was to have both Maxx Crosby and Trey Hendrickson, getting the deal done with Crosby and then signing Trey Hendrickson. And then, of course, when the Crosby thing fell apart, they pivoted very quickly. They were able to pivot very quickly because that was already in their plans. Mostly what I took away, though, from Eric DeCosta was his tone, his bearing. Obviously, we have focused on the collapse of this trade. It is clear, whatever you think about how the Ravens handled it, the Ravens are devastated that this fell apart. Eric DeCosta looks personally devastated. He used words like gutted. He was speechless. He said sitting in his office, he was trying to think what they could do, what was going to be next. He said he doesn't think there was anything he could have done differently, that ultimately they were gathering as much information as they could, and he had to make the right decision for the franchise. But you could hear how difficult it was for him on a personal level, how difficult the conversation was that he had to have with Maxx Crosby. It sounded like his voice was about to break up. So there are a lot of people who are apparently mad at the Baltimore Ravens, and DeCosta addressed that as well. He was asked, do you think that this is going to affect your relationships with other teams, with agents, with players? And he said, well, it hasn't stopped my phone from ringing. So I do think that perhaps all of the people who say, whoa, they're not going to be able to do any deals with the Baltimore Ravens anymore, maybe overplaying it just a little bit. This is a business. They had to make a very, very difficult decision. And they are obviously, as much as the Raiders may be upset and Maxx Crosby is upset, the Ravens are pretty devastated that they didn't get the guy they wanted.
Yeah, Judy, you know what? We hear this sometimes. I covered the Giants with Tom Coughlin back in the day, and I remember players were telling me, like, do you think free agents are going to want to come here? And I was like, ooh, that's a good thought. And then they had, like, the biggest free agency class in the history of the franchise the following spring. You want to know why? Because of money. Money! That's going to get people to go to the Baltimore Ravens in the future. It's not a question of all this. So I'm not worried about that part of things. I will say, though, the thought that something nefarious happened, look, in conversations with people in Baltimore last night into today, I think one thing's clear. They wanted Maxx Crosby. This is not a great ending for them. And the fact that you hear Eric DeCosta say, well, we wanted to get Maxx Crosby and Trey Hendrickson, those talks were underway, but it was the trade falling through and realizing, like, we have got to do something. Like, we're not going to get both, but we still have to make sure we get one. Now, that really hit the accelerator last night into today to get the numbers up to a point at which Hendrickson would accept the deal and become a Raven. And I'm sure in his mind, he would have loved for it to be, me on one end and Crosby on the other end, because when the Ravens lost Tyler Linderbaum, and this is what good teams do, they say, well, we had all this money dedicated to the center position because we were trying to get Linderbaum back. Well, you're not then just going to throw that money at another center. You're going to say, well, where can we use it to be more effective? Hey, how about we just make our pass rush dominant? You sort of saw it with the Eagles, adding Reek Woolen. Wasn't in their initial plans, but they were trying to retain Jalen Phillips. Now we can use that money elsewhere. That's what they tried to do on this one. But again, the deal falling through, the trade falling through, really made them hit the accelerator to finalize this deal with Hendrickson.
Mike, obviously, Eric DeCosta not going to get into details of Maxx Crosby's private medical info. The Raiders have not given any type of a detailed response. So there are a lot of different angles to this that we may never have covered. I would say one thing that is not in dispute is that we have made a shift from the story of the offseason being the Ravens trading 2 first-round picks for Maxx Crosby to the story of the offseason being the Ravens trading Maxx Crosby for Trey Hendrickson and their 2 first-round picks back. Patrick?
A lot to keep track of. Thank you to our NFL Network insiders as we will, get back to discuss another edge. Big-time deal for the Panthers for Jalen Phillips. Brian Baldinger joins us to discuss what that type of impact can be. And we're talking quarterbacks with Greg Rosenthal, the orchestrator, the administrator of the top 101 available free agents. Daniel Jones back in Indy. What does that mean? We discuss with Greg next on NFL Network. Here on the Insiders, here's what's new today coming into the NFL LA newsroom. This one in Detroit, where LA traded Jared Goff not too long ago. He's restructured his contract, clearing up $32 million in cap space for Dan Campbell's squad in Michigan. Elsewhere in that division, Aaron Jones is going to remain a Minnesota Vikings. Revised his contract in order to stay with the team. He's going to get a base salary of $5.5 million in this upcoming season. We did have some player movement, though. K'Lavon Chaisson is going to the Washington Commanders. It's a 1-year contract worth up to $12 million for the now former New England Patriot edge, who had some big success for the Patriots on their way to the Super Bowl. Here's the remaining free agents. You'll notice that we don't have a lot of the numbers north of 42. That's because I think the NFL is playing off of Greg Rosenthal's top 101 free agent list, and that is why we go straight to the source itself. Greg Rosenthal joining us here in the NFL LA newsroom. Greg, we got the Dimes deal. It's done. Daniel Jones back, got $50 million guaranteed. Your reaction to that?
A 2-year deal, I'm worried. Okay. And look, I know this is like hope season. I think the Colts had to make this deal, but it feels to me like they are chasing 10 magical games where they got out to an 8-2 record. But if the plan is, let's chase what we did last year, except our quarterback is coming off a torn Achilles tendon. He's taken up way more of the salary cap, and we just lost Michael Pittman. And oh, by the way, we wanted Trey Hendrickson. We lost him too. That doesn't make me feel great about what's to come. And ultimately, I look at the front office and the structure of this contract. And I think everyone's on a one-year deal. So Daniel Jones is a guy who has often won with his athleticism. And I'm hearing reports he'll be ready for training camp. He'll be ready for the start of the season. That's 9 months after that surgery. Training camp's about 7.5 months after that surgery. He's a guy who needs to run, I think, to be effective. And he was not as effective late in his tenure for the Colts. So to me, it's a big come down from Trey Hendrickson to Michael Clemens, who was signed today. And I just think it's going to be a really high bar for Daniel Jones and the Colts to do what they did early last season.
Highlighting how disappointing it was for him to have that injury at the time where he was already playing with a broken leg. You could kind of look back and not, hindsight, it's foresight. Perhaps he should not have been playing. You mentioned Trey Hendrickson in this situation. Eric DeCosta let us know an hour and a half ago that they didn't just want Maxx Crosby, they wanted them both. But now Trey Hendrickson is a Baltimore Raven.
Yeah, and I just wish that I was on the air with you when this news happened. I mean, Mr. Professionalism was handling it. And I think, look, if you're into the Ravens, I think you have to think forward now. Okay, you lost Maxx Crosby. They did not want to do that. You got Trey Hendrickson. That's fantastic. But they said they were, considering trying to get them both. You could use another edge rusher. And what I started to think about without Maxx Crosby is, what does this team still need? Trey Hendrickson, not as good a run stopper as Maxx Crosby. Maybe nobody is, but they really need that in their defense. I want some clarity on if Nnamdi Madubuike is going to be back next season. I look at center. You just lost the guy clearly they wanted to keep in Tyler Linderbaum, and then I don't know about you, but I could use a few more weapons for Lamar Jackson. Just lost Isaiah Likely. So a lot of focus here on what's going on at the edge position, Patrick, and I kind of look at a Ravens roster that is in a little worse shape right now than it usually is at this time.
Well, considering the circumstances that we thought last week, there's a 14th overall pick that's not in the equation. We'll see what position that ultimately leads to. We have had some positions change for the Washington Commanders, Greg. We just talked about Kayvon Chason. They get active. There were some folks that were like, what are the Commanders doing? A lot of these are today, as the Washington Commanders very, very active in this portion of the free agency frenzy. Your reaction to that?
I love it. I feel like I've been a Debbie Downer on this segment, and I'm in on the Commandos. 2026, you talked about going off my top 101 free agents list. Okonkwo, Leo Chanel, and Kayvon Chason were literally the 3 highest players other than those 2 in the top 20, and they picked them off right in a row. I think that they got great value for each one of those contracts, and you especially think about what Okonkwo could do on that offense. But Chanel, Chason, Owe, and then Nick Cross, who had the most run stops of any safety in the league last season in a defense, and not enough people are talking about this, that's going to be run by Durante Jones, a Brian Flores disciple. And I wondered, is it going to be more Dan Quinn or is it going to be more Durante Jones? I think these pickups indicate to me it's going to be a different attacking type of defense like the one that Flores ran. I think Leo Chanel and Cross especially are going to be fun pieces to watch.
And the Nick Cross information kind of goes back to your original point about the Indianapolis Colts and the circumstances there. A lot of issues to fill. And also Adam Peters, post the browser history. We know you're looking at the top 101. Everybody is NFL.com/top101 to see Greg Rosenthal's work. Thank you, Greg, because we've got more news coming into the newsroom. We knew this one. Of course, it's officially official as Travis Kelce back for season number 14 with the Kansas City Chiefs. There have been some notable departures, though. How about this graphic? Look to the right side. There's a lot of Super Bowl champions on that, including 2 big parts of the Rams secondary now, Trent McDuffie and Jalen Watson. They do get Travis Kelce back. Tyquan Thornton, the speedy deep threat. If not for Alec Pierce, he would have had the top yards per catch number for a couple of years now. Let's bring in Jeff Jadia to talk about the Kansas City Chiefs offseason. Jeff, a lot has changed, and a lot specifically for Steve Spagnuolo to try to figure out coming up here in 2026.
Yeah, a lot of excitement about what happened on offense with Kenneth Walker and Travis Kelce. But you look on that right side of that graphic you just showed, and it's pretty sparse on that side of the football. And this is going to be a big offseason for that defense. They've been really good with what Steve Spagnuolo, their defensive coordinator, has been able to do with that unit. But when you're losing 2 corners and you're talking about playing a guy like Noah Williams, who was a rookie last year, didn't play a whole bunch, and Christian Fulton, who was hurt for most of the season at your 2 starting corners, that's a little bit of risk. That's a risky proposition. And let's not forget that edge rusher is also a concern here. George Karlaftis is the only proven player at that position, and so they got to find more bodies there. They got to find more depth at the interior defensive line. They've made some good moves. Kyrus Tonga coming in an interior defensive line should help Chris Jones out. Safety, Alohi Gilman coming in should help that back end. But, yeah, if you're Steve Spagnuolo right now, you're not sitting there celebrating so much about what's happening in your organization because you need more bodies and you need more starters fast.
Yeah, so much, of course, on the legs, arms, shoulders of Patrick Mahomes, who did have that surgery on December 15th, 2025. All hopes kind of leading on 15 for a lot for this Kansas City Chiefs team. Jeff Judea checking out the rest of that Chiefs roster. We got more insiders coming up as the Raiders, well, hey, they just acquired Maxx Crosby. You could view it that way in a certain aspect as Brian Baldinger joins the show to talk about what's next for the folks in Las Vegas. That's coming up here on The Insiders on NFL Network. Stick around. Back here on The Insiders, here's what's coming in new today to the NFL LA newsroom. Of course, a lot of quarterback transactions that have happened this offseason. A couple of them becoming official today in Kyler Murray and Kirk Cousins. Daniel Jones gets a deal, gets $50 million guaranteed. And Malik Willis and Tua Tagovailoa changing spots. Malik Willis now the starting quarterback for the Dolphins, and Tua with an opportunity to start in Atlanta. For more quarterback breakdown, let's get to our NFL Network insiders. Tom Pelissero, Ian Rappaport, Judy Batista, and Mike Garafolo.
Thank you very much, Patrick. The Daniel Jones saga has come to an end for now, agreeing to terms, as Ian and I reported this morning. It's 2 years, $88 million, can earn up to $100 million with incentives. Ian, important for a variety of reasons for the Colts to get this done. This also gives them some flexibility, some stability at a position where both those things have been an issue here for a number of years.
Stability more important than flexibility here, because what the Indianapolis Colts have wanted was just a franchise quarterback. It's been, 10 years or so since they've had one. It has been a frustrating circumstances of different quarterbacks in and out. This was the guy that they wanted to be their quarterback long term. And it wasn't just the team. It was also Alec Pierce, their top receiver, who signed for a 4-year, $114 million deal in free agency. He wanted to sign believing that Daniel Jones would be the quarterback. The team got to work, wanting to do it anyway, but certainly that helped spur things along. End up signing him to a 2-year, as you mentioned, $88 million deal. $100 million overall. That is the max. $50 million this year, which is $12 more million than he would have gotten if he was on the transition tag. Daniel Jones gets another payday, and they do believe he is going to be on track for week 1 after that Achilles injury. So obviously a significant move to solidify some key spots for Indy.
Yeah, and this gives some optimism for the Indianapolis Colts. They got the quarterback they wanted back, Daniel Jones. They get to keep Alec Pierce. It's a good deal for all sides with Daniel Jones because, listen, $50 million guaranteed this year is manageable for any team. And for Daniel Jones, if he comes back and regains his health well and plays the way he was playing in the first half of the season last year, he hits free agency pretty quickly. He's only tied to the Colts until 2027 with this contract. So he would then get another bite at the apple. Perhaps it would again be with the Colts. But he would get another bite at the apple fairly quickly. So this actually worked out well. It took them a little time. They needed to use the transition tag to buy them some time. But they finally got to the point where they had all hoped they would be. And now they can go forward again. There is some optimism based on what they saw in that first half of the season before Daniel Jones started getting hurt last year that they can pick up and go forward with that offense.
So the Colts now have their starting quarterback locked in. The Vikings may soon as well, Mike, at least the guy to compete with J.J. McCarthy for the job. Now that Kyler Murray's release official from the Arizona Cardinals, Vikings plan to make a push from Kyler Murray, and it seems fair to say right now they are the team to beat.
Sounds that way, and you see the way that the chairs have been filled the last couple of days. It was kind of sort of indicating that was going to be the case, and now that Kyler's free, that is what we expect. And I heard you say compete. Yes, that's my understanding, is that this is not going to be rolling out the red carpet, or I guess the purple carpet, for Kyler Murray and saying, you are the starter here. You're going to have to compete with J.J. McCarthy. Now, I had mentioned some of the discussion for the Vikings about which way they want to go was making sure it was a good short-term decision and also a good long-term decision for the team. J.J. McCarthy still in the plans, still going to be given a chance to be this team's franchise quarterback. So that starts with a competition with Kyler Murray. Look, as we're sitting here right now, Who do we expect to be the starting quarterback? I would say probably Kyler Murray at this point, but it'll be a competition throughout the spring and the summer. And J.J. McCarthy still got a chance to dig in his heels and say, no, this is my team. I want to be the franchise quarterback of the Vikings. Let's see how it plays out.
I hope he says it just like that. You know, Tom mentioned
just like that.
yesterday or whenever
with
that
eye
was
black on
Good Morning Football, saying that Kyler Murray wanted to have conversations with teams, general managers, coaches, sort of in advance of his 2027 free agency. That seems to be ongoing now. Actually, a pretty smart thing to do. You have the time. You're allowed to do Zooms. Why not take the time to have some real good football conversations and then potentially come back and end up signing with the Vikings? I'm really interested to see where this goes. Kevin O'Connell has done an excellent job with a whole bunch of different random quarterbacks and getting them to have success. Kyler has to be the most talented quarterback he's had. He has had some incredible, incredible moments. Has not put it all together yet. Certainly by the end in Arizona, it was not going in a great direction. What does Kyler Murray become with Kevin O'Connell as his coach? It's going to be a really, really fun storyline to follow if this all happens tomorrow.
Another release becoming official today. The Falcons cutting Kirk Cousins. That was a function of his contract. It was an inevitability. Atlanta moving forward with Michael Penix Jr. and Tua Tagovailoa. And Judy, Kirk Cousins has accomplished a lot in the league. He looked pretty good down the stretch last season, but you look at the landscape for quarterbacks right now, it's hard to find a spot for Kirk Cousins even to compete to start, which means this may take a while for him.
Yeah, we were just talking about all the chairs being filled. Well, the chairs have mostly been filled for starting jobs, certainly, and even jobs that would allow him to compete for the starting job. And you got to think that Kirk Cousins is going to be very careful and very choosy about his next destination, given what happened in Atlanta. I am sure he does not want a repeat of where he goes to a team which promptly drafts a quarterback who is immediately going to take his job. Probably would not like that. He's obviously made a lot of money in his career. He can sit back and wait. And let's be honest, it's an inevitability. Quarterbacks get hurt in the NFL, whether it is during mini camps or training camp, a quarterback is going to get hurt. And I have a feeling that every time a quarterback gets hurt and a team needs a starter to come in very quickly, I have a feeling we're going to be talking about Kirk Cousins.
I mean, it could be a similar situation. What happened in Atlanta? Matt Ryan was in was on a desk at CBS doing their pregame show, and then all of a sudden now he's in the building running the Falcons. We could see Kirk Cousins be in media, do his thing. He's actually very good at it. And then someone has a quarterback injury, and they say, you know what, we're going to pay you more than $10 million to come in and save our season. Bring on Kirk Cousins. Off goes the tie, and on goes the football uniform. Definitely a situation we are going to be talking about a lot next year if there's an early quarterback injury.
Off go the ties every night. Another 2-hour edition here of the Insiders. We've got Patrick Claybon in on the no tie game. Patrick, we'll send it back to you.
Thanks, Tom. Yes, I removed my tie because bullying works, and you guys got it off. It's time for a fantasy look here on the Insiders. Michael F. Florio joining our show because so much, Mike, everybody wants to know fantasy impact of the players involved, but there's also an impact on the players that weren't directly involved in free agency. So let's go through some of those. We'll start with Texans quarterback C.J. Stroud. What do you think the impact has been for him?
First, I had to lose my tie. I wore one yesterday like it was my first time on the Insiders or something like that, right? I know the rules of this show. I just forgot. But I think it is unfortunately trending down for C.J. Stroud. Because for some reason, the Texans continue to be like, let's make life harder on him and get rid of our best offensive lineman. For a second straight offseason, that's what they did when they lost Titus Howard, who had allowed the fewest quarterback pressures of all tackles last year. In fact, it wasn't even close. I know they brought in Braden Smith to replace him, but he has allowed pressure and sacks at a much higher rate despite drawing less double teams. Stroud has just struggled while under pressure the last 2 years, and to me, their O-line took another step back. David Montgomery should help, but they also lost Christian Kirk and haven't brought in any receivers. So pending the draft, I do think C.J. Stroud is what he was last year, like a QB2 in fantasy.
All right, so you hear that, the folks in Houston. The draft could have a chance to make the reaction from Michael F. Florio a little more positive for C.J. Stroud. Let's go across the street to that stadium right over there, Omari and Hampton of the Los Angeles Chargers. Your view of how free agency has impacted him?
Yeah, I'm so excited for him. I wore Chargers colors today.
Powder on.
Look, first, I love the Mike McDaniel OC hire. I know that happened weeks ago, but I think that was a huge arrow pointing up for Omari and Hampton. And they went out and they added to this offensive line, right? They they're going to have their star tackles back healthy. They added a new center, a guard, and more depth behind those pieces so it can't hopefully collapse like it did last year. And then back to McDaniel. We know he's going to create running lanes. He's also going to throw the ball to his running backs a ton. But just put Omarion Hampton in positions where he could get the ball in space, because they added Alec Ingold and Charlie Kolar, which doesn't move the fantasy needle at all, but they are both excellent run blockers. So I think Hampton remains an RB1 this year for fantasy, and all of the hype that you had for him last year still applies, but I think he goes in round 2 or 3, so if you want him, be ready to pay a price.
Speaking of players who are the best at their position, we've been on Trey McBride for a very, very long time. There's certainly a change as Kyler Murray no longer is going to be involved. The opportunity for the franchise to kind of blame Kyler is going to be gone as well. So what is the impact for Trey McBride considering the whole offseason in free agency?
Yeah, for a while, I thought they were going to get Malik Willis, and I was like, as much as I'm excited for Malik Willis, that feels like a negative for Trey McBride. Well, it's going to be Jacoby Brissett, which is best case scenario, because last season, 20 fantasy points per game with Jacoby Brissett, 13 without him. In the 12 games he played with Jacoby, he scored 10 touchdowns. He had 7 touchdowns in his other 54 career games. Plus, he averaged almost 11 targets per game and 80 yards per game with Jacoby, which is elite numbers. But his low in any game in targets was 8. And he had just 1 game with single-digit fantasy points. So the floor is super safe. The ceiling is like wide receiver 1 numbers. Forget tight end 1 numbers. This is best case scenario for him. He is the clear-cut tight end 1, in my opinion. And if you want him, I think he's going to be going in the 2nd round of drafts, Patrick. And I think that's an appropriate price for him.
Yeah, you could sometimes, considering the way the season ended, maybe somebody could make a 1 case for Trey McBride if they wanted. Let's stick with the tight ends. Let's stick with the blue team that you like a little bit more than the Los Angeles Chargers. That would be the Buffalo Bills. We just saw the big-time deal, well, the extension for 1 tight end. Let's talk about Dalton Kincaid. How do you think the offseason's been for him?
Not great. Because you mentioned they bring Dawson Knox there, which is going to continue to limit the snaps that Dalton Kincaid plays. But that's not what I'm worried about. Because when Kincaid was out there last year, he had a 26% target rate. That was the 4th highest of all tight ends. That means when he was on the field, the ball was going his way, and the clear-cut top targets were him and Khalil Shakir. Now I think those 2 guys are fighting for 2nd behind DJ Moore, who I expect to be the clear-cut number 1 option in the passing game for Josh Allen and the Bills. So we know that McBride and Bowers are the top tight ends. After that, there's a sizable tier of like Colston Loveland, Tyler Warren, Harold Fannin. I think
there's some guy in Atlanta as well, Mike.
Kyle Pitts, yeah. I think all of those guys are trending up, and they have firmly surpassed Dalton Kincaid for me.
We're going to have a chance to talk more tight ends, more fantasy football coming up next week on our edition of Fantasy Live, this free agency fallout. We'll thank Michael F. Florio for joining us here on the Insiders. When we come back, let's get ready for our 2nd hour. I guess our final hour of the frenzied edition, the 2-hour special edition of the Insiders. Maybe we get breaking news tonight? Who knows? We'll get back here on NFL Network coming up next. You're watching the Insiders. Everybody, welcome to another hour of the Insiders. Patrick Claybon here in the NFL LA newsroom. Our NFL Network Insiders, Tom Pelissero, Judy Batista, Mike Garafolo, and Ian Rappaport, all with us, all in our respective rooms where it happened, as news has been rolling in to all of their phones over the past several days. Let's catch you up on some before they discuss it. We'll start with the news about a quarterback, Kyler Murray. And a lot of folks probably been waiting for his official release. The Cardinals officially released him seconds after the new league year started today at 4 o'clock Eastern. And we did get a statement from Monty Austinford saying, with the start of today's new league year and transactions now official, we want to thank Kyler for everything he has done for this organization over the past 7 seasons. They said they are extremely grateful for his contributions. And now we can all speculate. The speculation that we maybe could have been doing had this statement been released prior to today. We also got some news regarding Atlanta Falcons quarterback Kirk Cousins, no longer an Atlanta Falcons quarterback. The Falcons announcing they have released Kirk Cousins with a post-June 1st designation. So Kirk Cousins now with an opportunity to play elsewhere. Big active, I guess, quarterback news from Daniel Jones, who played late in the season with a broken leg, had a torn Achilles. The actually gets his deal, gets re-signed by the Indianapolis Colts, 2 years, up to $88 million worth, up to, could be $100 million, $50 million of that fully guaranteed. So Daniel Jones will remain an Indianapolis Colt. Trey Hendrickson, of course, after we find out about the Maxx Crosby deal not happening, we get news that Trey Hendrickson has agreed to a 4-year deal, could be worth up to $112 million, $60 million of that guaranteed. There was a world where the Ravens, according to Eric DeCosta, wanted both Trey Hendrickson and Maxx Crosby. He explained that earlier today.
I think our relationship with agents and with other teams is really, really good. I understand the question. I think that GMs understand the importance of getting as much information as possible before making decisions. And I would say that most agents would say that myself, George, Nick, Mark Acevedo, Ozzie, Sashi, everybody that works with agents would say that we're a class organization that does business the right way, respectful, and willing to get deals done.
Derek, I know you've had to make some tough conversations with players over the years. What was it like with Max when you had to inform him that you guys were going to have to move on?
Yeah, like you said, in this business you have a lot of tough conversations, right? It was tough. It's a guy that I really admire as a player. I mean, you've all watched him play, so you all know what he's like as a player, right? This is a guy that plays like a Raven, So, yeah, it's challenging. You get emotionally attached. That's what I would say.
Eric, you said you were gutted by this. Is there anything you regret that you did or did not do as part of this process that could have changed the results, the end results here?
I think I'm hard on myself, and you question everything you do, in this business. You're never perfect, right, with the draft and with free agency. I think in this particular instance, I'm really proud of the team and the doctors and, the guys that work with me. And this is a tough thing that we have to deal with in this business. I don't really know what we could do differently than what we did. So, again, it's a really, really, really tough call. There were moments yesterday when, honestly, I was probably speechless. Just sitting in my chair in my office and just thinking about what the next step would be and trying to get as much information as possible. And it wasn't, I should say, it wasn't just, in a situation like this, you try to get as much information as you can from as many different sources as you can. And it just didn't work out. So, tough, very, very challenging. We've dealt with these kinds of things in the past, but probably never at such a large figure. So, challenging.
Did you try to renegotiate at all the terms of it?
I think at some point you get to the point where, when you look at the situation, you have to make the right decision. It's not always about, the value. It's just what is the right decision for the club at the time. And that's a hard thing to do. But as I said, when you're a steward of the organization and you're put in that position, you've got to make the tough call.
It has still not even been 24 hours since the stunning news via the Raiders that the Ravens had backed out of the Maxx Crosby trade. We heard very little last night from the Raiders, Mike. We now have heard more for the first time from Eric DeCosta. Watching that clip back right there, what jumps out to you about how this entire thing played out?
I'll start on that last point there. He was asked, did you think about renegotiating this one? Because Jane Slater and I did report this afternoon that there was at least a brief conversation, a brief mention of, hey, we may want to talk about the compensation here because we've got to mitigate the risk of this going forward. And the thought was, because let's rewind. It could have gone one of three ways. Could have fallen apart completely, which it did. Could have stayed together as it was, and the Ravens go, all right, well, we'll just manage the knee as best we can. Or somewhere in the middle of, well, we got to change the compensation to mitigate the risk. And that was broached. It was mentioned briefly. But then they got more medical information that came in, and they said, no, we're not comfortable with this at all. We got to pull the plug, which Eric DeCosta said was a hard thing to say, was a hard call to make. Nobody likes to back out of deals. And the other part of this, and the conversations that I've had with folks in Baltimore over the last day plus, is they wanted Maxx Crosby. it was not nefarious in my mind, based on these conversations that I've had. It's not like they said, probably shouldn't have given up 2 first-round picks. I'll tell you what, we'll fail them on the physical, which there was a deal years ago with Roger Saffold with the Raiders that people think that that's what happened. It's not what happened in this. They wanted Maxx Crosby. They weren't comfortable with the medical. They pull out. They move on. They get Trey Hendrickson, really caused them to accelerate and say, we've got to at least get one of the guys that we thought we were going to both get.
I think it was pretty obvious that they really wanted Maxx Crosby just by Eric DeCosta's demeanor today. The Raiders have Maxx Crosby again. It's as if they gave up 2 first-round draft picks and got Maxx Crosby. So how do they go forward? Well, the question is, are they going to keep him? Will they keep him long-term? Is it possible that teams will re-engage at some point? And is there any way that teams can come up with a value that the Raiders would accept? Remember, before they traded him or tried to trade him to the Ravens, they were insistent that they were going to get their price or they would not trade Maxx Crosby, period. And the price was 2 first-rounders. They're not getting first-rounders now. They've lost so much leverage. Teams have gone on and made other plans and made other deals and are going about their business. And, of course, now there are going to be significant questions about the state of his knee. So they're not going to get that kind of compensation. But at some point, could a team or teams re-engage and could they decide to move on? Right now, they're moving forward with Maxx Crosby as a Raider again. He was apparently in the building and he's working on his rehab, as he always was. The good news is he left that team on good terms. He made it clear he would always be a Raider. He was a Raider for life. He wanted to be a Raider for life. And so the question now is, can they put all of that toothpaste back in the tube and go forward with Maxx Crosby as a Raider, either short-term or long-term?
Yeah, there is an argument for not burning bridges in life, and this is a pretty good reason why. You just never know when you might come back. A team trades you all the way to Baltimore for 2 first-round picks. Next thing you know, a couple days later, you're back, embracing the new organization. You're right, Judy. This is a team that was pretty bad and didn't have a ton of talent about 3 days ago. Added a lot of players, spent a lot of money to bolster this team. It's a lot better, now than it was, and the fact that Maxx Crosby was back in the building today, focusing on his rehab, is at least a sign that he has eyes forward, aimed at rejoining the organization and, kind of moving forward with the Raiders. Will someone engage? It is certainly possible. I don't believe it's going to happen until Crosby, has his knee perfectly healthy and fully rehabbed. But maybe this is a little bit of fate here. Maybe this is a guy who should finish his career with one organization and actually does it. From the Baltimore Ravens standpoint, this was a good lesson in how one free agent signing affects another. And I think Mike mentioned this recently as well. They lose out on Linderbaum, and they say, all right, we have the money. Instead of just bringing in Max, we're going to try to bring in 2 pass rushers. This was a lot. They ended up with only Trey Hendrickson, but certainly a whirlwind for both these teams that now have to restart after thinking one thing was happening and everything collapsed right in front of their eyes.
Maxx Crosby is also in a really unique position. Think about being one of the only superstar players ever to be leaving a team or believe you are leaving a team, then watch like a third party as they sign all sorts of other players and then come back and be like, oh, this team looks a lot different. They added Quay Walker. They added Nakobe Dean. They added offensively, signing Jalen Naylor. They signed Tyler Linderbaum to the biggest center deal by far in NFL history. Now, I'm not saying that fixes everything and all the points of frustration that Maxx Crosby had, but you are looking at a different landscape in terms of the roster and maybe some players like the linebackers you have behind you who might be able to help Maxx Crosby do his job. I would say it's fair to say right now, we have not heard the last of the Maxx Crosby story. There are still many, many different tentacles of this and many different directions that things can play out. When he is healthy, which his agents were transparent throughout the process, was not going to happen until June. A meniscus repair surgery, even for a guy who's not 29 years old like Max, is a 4 to 6 month recovery. In June, does that trade market bounce back? Do things continue to evolve? Does Max try to get his mind back into it and decide, I'm still not in the place that the Raiders is the best place for me? These are all open questions because everybody, again, is 24 hours removed from the shock. But, Ian, I think one thing that's important to note here is nobody is sitting here saying that Maxx Crosby cannot play football. Even the Ravens are not saying Maxx Crosby cannot play football. He played most of last season with this injury. Didn't practice much, but he played most of the season with the injury. This is about the medium term, not even long term because of his age, but medium term. Maxx Crosby, once he's healthy, there's really not a lot of reason to believe that he's not going to look like Maxx Crosby, at least for the relatively near future, Ian.
I got nothing. Send it back to Patrick.
All right, Patrick.
Favorite toss ever. Thank you to our NFL Network insiders. We're back here on the Insiders on NFL Network, so welcome back to you. Also, welcome back to the Denver Broncos. Coming from the Denver Broncos to quarterback Sam Ehlinger, as they have signed Sam Ehlinger. He will return to the Denver Broncos. And the hero from week 1, where the San Francisco 49ers beat the eventual Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks, Jake Tonjes agrees to a 2-year, $8 million contract, $5.5 million of that guaranteed, according to our insiders. Ian Rappaport, Tom Pelissero, and Mike Garafolo, as we look back to a fun free agency weekend. Hey, everybody.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Let's start out with a loose end that exists in free agency, or the lack thereof. Mike, tell me about the latest on Dallas Goedert and his future, if any, in Philadelphia.
Yes, the Eagles tight end had a $20 million cap hit that was scheduled to hit at the end of business yesterday, which would have cramped the Eagles a little bit in that regard. However, as my friend Zach Berman down there in Philadelphia of The Athletic first reported, that void on Goddard's deal has been moved back to Friday. Now, this is important for 2 reasons. One, the Eagles are trying to retain Dallas Goedert, number one. I mentioned that to you before. And Goddard would like to remain in Philadelphia if at all possible. But the other aspect here at play is the A.J. Brown aspect. Now, it's a huge cap hit if the Eagles trade A.J. Brown right now. It's still a big cap hit if they trade him after June 1st, but it's really bad if they trade him now. And we have been saying that with the cap hit and the money dedicated to Brown, if they keep him, they weren't going to be able to keep the likes of Goddard and Reed Blankenship and the Kobe Dean, the guys that already left. So pushing this void back a couple of days leaves the window to trade A.J. Brown still open here. Because if they move him and they take that cap hit, they can bring Goddard back, use the money that they were going to spend on Brown, and also avoid the cap hit there. So, a couple of moving parts there in Philadelphia. Stay tuned. We'll see what happens with A.J. Brown. Still could go either way.
A lot of action in Philadelphia so far, at least in terms of the things that could happen. Meanwhile, the Jets have had real action, Judy. A lot of maneuvering here. Some signings of some very seasoned veterans here. What do you make of the makeover so far in New York?
I want to give some love to the Jets because we don't often have the opportunity to do this, so I want to take the moment to do this. But they've gotten better in the last few days. You're right. They have signed some seasoned vets. We just talked about Geno Smith. Minkah Fitzpatrick is coming. Demario Davis, Joseph Asai, Nashawn Wright. He had 5 interceptions last year. Famously, the Jets had none. They are an improved team. What they should have, at the very least, in terms will be competence and also leadership, which they badly needed. They badly needed both, but they really needed locker room leadership, and they're going to get that from Geno, Minkah, Demario Davis. They've got some veteran guys in there. Last year was a mess, and it was dysfunctional at times for the Jets. It should not be that way anymore. They kept Breece Hall. They've got some talent on the team. Geno is the perfect bridge guy to get them to the next generation. They got a lot of draft picks coming up. I think the Jets are in a much better place than where they were when the season ended.
Geno, Minkah, Demario Davis, that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 NFL seasons between the 3 of those guys. The Commanders, Ian, last year were very active in the older veteran market. It obviously did not work out, a step back for them programmatically. This year seems like a little bit different philosophy for how they're trying to build this thing up.
This year they got younger and seemingly better. Now, they were in different position, a couple years ago. I would say they were in a position of like, all right, solidify the roster, bring in some older guys, need leadership, set the culture. And it took them, along with Jaden Daniels being awesome, took them to the NFC title game and had us thinking they were a team on the rise. Last year, the older players got injured and mostly looked old. and everything went the wrong way. This year, they got more athletic and faster. Obviously, Odafe Owe to a $100 million contract yesterday, or I don't even know when that was, 65 days ago. That was one. Today, two intriguing signings started the day off by them signing K'Lavon Chaisson, the former first-rounder. Really impressed last year with the Patriots, a career-high 7.5 sacks. He gets a one-year, $12 million deal, and because it's just a one-year deal, has the opportunity to cash in again. And then Chig Okonkwo, the former tight end from the Tennessee Titans, gets a 3-year, $30 million deal. Another really, really good athlete, guy who can really run. At the very least, the Washington Commanders got faster, and that is a good thing.
Chig Okonkwo, seemingly the only former Titan who was with Mike Vrabel who didn't end up with the Patriots. Add another one to the list. Kevin Byard, the longtime safety, led the league in interceptions last season, has led the league in interceptions during the course of his career, headed to New England now on a one-year, $9 million deal. This is an important addition for that defense with Mike Vrabel and, of course, Zach Kerr, now the full-time defensive coordinator. Byard's got a lot of productivity in terms of ball production here. 32 years old. He's toward the back end of his career, but showed again last season in Chicago what he can do. The Bears now have to replace one of their veterans who took the ball away a lot in 2025. Meanwhile, the Cowboys continue to make over their defense, making multiple trades tonight. First off, moving on from Osa Odigizua. They get a 2026 third-round draft pick from the 49ers. For Dallas, this allows them to remove a player who was counted about $16 million this year that he was owed at a position where they're spending a ton of money already on Quinnen Williams and Kenny Clark. They also pick up a third-round draft pick. And for San Francisco, they got outbid on John Franklin Myers. Now they are able to plug in somebody who immediately is a starting defensive tackle. Also sent Solomon Thomas in a separate deal to the Titans, whose coach there now, Robert Saleh, seems to be gathering all of his old Jets. It's a lot of these parts, Patrick. One of the ways you can figure out free agency. Who were you with before? Let's get my guys back. Tons of that going around, and I'll get it back to you.
Yeah, one of the best ways to get things that you know is to do it with people you know. And that's why I brought, Michael F. Florio back, because we're going to do a fantasy look here on the Insiders. We'll keep it Titans related, because Cam Ward sees a lot of change for his team. He's got a new head coach, new play callers. How do you think the impact on Cam Ward has been, considering the way this offseason's gone?
Anyone who listens or watches the fantasy football, NFL fantasy football show knows I'm super invested in the Titans offense. Off-season, I thought they could kind of make a Patriot-like jump, maybe not make the Super Bowl, but add a bunch around your young, talented quarterback and then see where the chips lie. But they made good moves, like Wan'Dale Robinson knows the system and is a very reliable possession receiver who could be a safety blanket. They added a new center, brought in Daniel Bellinger, but that seems kind of like a downgrade to me compared to Chig Okonkwo. So for me, it's a little bit disappointing, but this is as of today, because I had hopes that the Titans would add a lot of talent around Cam Ward. Most of their additions have been on defense, but there still is the draft, and they could load up on O-linemen and wide receivers and even another running back there. So it's an incomplete right now, but I did have higher hopes.
Yeah, we just needed Robert Saleh to be closer to more offensive players throughout his career, and then they would be coming to Nashville. Let's go to looking elsewhere, because Mike Evans is out.
Yeah.
A lot of change in Tampa Bay. Emeka Egbuka, how do you feel free agency's been for him?
I think it's been great for him. I think the arrow is pointing up for Emeka Egbuka, because no Mike Evans there opens up a lot of volume for all of the Bucs wide receivers, but I don't think anyone sees a bigger jump without Evans than Emeka Egbuka, because last season he averaged 12.5 fantasy points per game without Evans and just 10 per game with him. 9 targets per game without Evans. That drops to 6 when Evans was out there. His yardage was about a 25 per game difference as well. I know Egbuka and Baker faded down the stretch last year, but in year 2, with Mike Evans not being there, he has a chance to be the top target. I think he remains like a wide receiver 3. That's probably where you have to draft him. But I would argue as of right now, his upside is top 20, if not higher.
All right, big-time upside for Emeka Egbuka. Let's go to the Green Bay Packers. Romeo Doubs out. How do you feel about the impact on Christian Watson?
I love Christian Watson heading into next season. For much of his career, he would play behind Romeo Doubs. Doubs was the X receiver who never came off the field, which limited the opportunities that Christian Watson could get. But we did see Watson take over that number one role down the stretch last season, and he had his most consistent fantasy run of his career. So with Doubs gone and Kraft up in the air, at least early on, there is opportunity for Watson to be the number one option for Jordan Love. I expect a lot like Emeka Egbuka, right? Like, he'll probably be in the wide receiver 3 territory where you have to draft him. But I think his upside is top 20, if not being a wide receiver 1. There is nothing he cannot do on a football field. We just need him to stay healthy and get the targets.
Maybe we come in with the most clarity we've had the Packers receiving group in the past 6 years. Let's go to a guy who, it's been clear, Mr. New Orleans, Alvin Kamara. Now they go and sign ETN. What do you think the impact is?
This pains me, probably not as much as I know it pains you. You are a big Alvin Kamara fan. Whether or not he is traded, I think his days as a lead running back are coming to an end. Last year, if you pick a stat, it was likely a career low for Alvin Kamara. Explosive run rate, yards before contact, average or top speed. Even as a receiver, which is what made him special for years, many of his metrics were a career low. But this is the circle of life for running backs in fantasy, right? You start off wanting them to get more touches, then they are a star, and then at the end, you're like, no, give the touches to someone else. I'm sick of this guy. Alvin Kamara, unfortunately, is starting to get into that territory in his career.
The circle through despair and hope. We always have hope to spend time with Michael F. Flora.